CNBC-TV18. This is top of mind here in light of the energy crisis that we're seeing, in light of the Russia-Ukraine war and what that could do as far as commodity prices are concerned. The shift to renewable, of course, continues to be a big focus area. What's the sense that you get from Davos in terms of whether this is going to accelerate that shift or maybe slow it down?
Well, Shereen, that's a terrific question, because I think that the world of energy is in a bit of turmoil right now. And we're trying to parse through the different strands of it and see what the implications might be for all of us in this sector over the next several years. I think the one thing that is certainly coming out is that energy security is becoming center stage, which it was not until now. And in Europe particularly, that's a very, very big concern as to how to decouple from Russian gas. I think that's really the key item of discussion. And, I chair the electricity governors group here. And yesterday we had a meeting of that group, and most of the discussion, 90% of it, was around the whole issue of energy security and where might Europe get its alternate sources of energy from. And there are,
where will they get alternate?
So exactly.
Because America is doing what it can do, but it cannot replace that demand.
Right. So there is no easy solution. I think it'll have to be a mix of a number of things. Number one, they'll have to go for a little bit more energy efficiency. So that's one. The second, and that includes things like turning down the thermostats in the winter. That is something that can actually bring down the gas requirements significantly. So things are that. The second thing is they will, in the near term, ramp up fossil fuel capacities without making new investments. So wherever there are existing unused capacities, they'll try to ramp those up.
So fire up the coal plants.
Maybe not coal, but certainly wherever they can lay their hands on some unused gas capacity or source the gas from, maybe Northern Africa, etc. So they'll do that. Nuclear, they'll try to ramp it up as much as possible. So that's the second thing. And the third thing, but which is a more medium-term thing, is that they're going to make a big thrust on the whole clean energy space, because the longer-term solution has to come from there. But it will take time to get that set up. And within renewable energy, there is going to be the whole issue of green hydrogen, and that's why you hear so much talk about green hydrogen, because green hydrogen is in some ways renewable energy that you can put on a ship and ship it away to some other part of the world. And that's what can actually replace gas in the long run. It will take time, but that's really the direction, I think, of travel that one is likely to see. Now, at the same time, the climate change issue is something that they don't want to leave on the back burner either, right? And so the question is, how do you combine the whole issue of energy security without losing sight of the whole climate change imperative? And how do you, in fact, move that agenda forward as well? And, Europe has always been at the forefront of the climate change conversation. And so they do want to, A, set an example, and B, radiate out from their own trade, and through their own trade, pressure on the rest of the world to make the rest of the world move faster on the decarbonization agenda, which, if you ask me, is not a bad thing, actually.
Yeah, but it's a complex situation at this point in time. I mean, you've got an energy crisis, you've got inflation, you've got a war, you've got competing requirements for fiscal resources, and that's where my question comes from, and I'm curious about whether this could, in fact, impinge on decisions that perhaps would have been taken but may now be put on pause.
So, I think that decisions around the clean transition will not get put on pause. I think they will go ahead. But certainly what is impacting the clean energy sector right now, as you know, is all the things that you said. Number one, there's already been, because of COVID and the disruptions around COVID, a very significant spike in commodity prices. And that is obviously impacting all of us. And it's not just a question of prices going up. It's also a question of supply disruptions, especially because of what's happening in China, right? And so there are issues around how quickly you can deliver your projects as well, rather than just the cost of the projects. But I think, look, all said and done, we will be able to get through this. It'll take maybe a year or two. But I think one fundamental fact that will emerge from all of this is that energy prices are going to go up, whether we like it or not. Because, if you take a big chunk of supply from the energy world and just knock it out, right, and if it doesn't go elsewhere, then therefore prices will obviously go up for the remaining sources of supply that are left behind. And that's certainly going to happen in Europe, and I think the European governments and European consumers are willing to pay that cost because of the decoupling, the energy security and all of that. But what impact it has on the rest of the world, and the unintended consequences on countries like India, does it mean that our energy prices are also going to be higher? I think it might very well happen, right? And it also depends on how Russian oil and gas is able to find its way into the rest of the world. And does it find its way into the rest of the world? So I think it's a very complex situation. And for countries like India, there might be long-term implications of this very seriously, because it might be that we have elevated energy prices for some period of time. And when I say energy, I don't mean the power sector. I really mean the oil and gas sector.
Absolutely, oil and gas. And we've already seen the government cut excise duties. They still have a little bit of headroom to do more, but perhaps they'll wait it out a little bit before taking the next course of action on that front. But, you know, speaking of energy security, and I want to address the current situation back home, we are seeing power outages across states at this point in time on account of the coal shortages. What is the situation on the ground? Has there been any improvement at this point?
Look, there has been improvement, partly because renewable energy now has ticked up. The monsoon season has started, so wind energy has gone up. It's raining in some parts of the country, so hydro generation has also picked up. And along with that, obviously, power demand has also come down a little bit. And that is why you see prices on the merchant market, which had knocked up to 12 rupees, which is the cap that the CRC had set, are now down to maybe 6 or 7 or 8 rupees. They're still very elevated, but they've come down to some extent. I think the fundamental problem we have, Shereen, in India, is that our institutional capacity within the overall power sector is, needs improvement. And I'm really talking about the fact that our distribution utilities, which I've been talking about for ages and ages and ages, unfortunately, are just very poorly institutionally governed. And so therefore, they're only able to react to things that are happening right in front of them at that point in time. They don't do long-term planning. And therefore, they're not able to plan for the fact that if the demand falls during COVID, that it might go up as well at some point in time. And so they make no allowances for that. And obviously, planning for something as complex as power supplies, you have to be looking at least 5 or 10 years, doing long-range forecasts and all of that. And I'm sure they do it. It is just that they're not able to take action on it fast enough. And so that's why, for example, we don't see enough demand coming into SECI, which is the Solar Energy Corporation of India, to buy more renewable energy. And SECI therefore is not doing enough auctions. And if they don't do enough auctions, we will always have a deficit of renewable energy in the system.
But you have a deficit and you have supply. Why do you think the two are not coming together?
So it's a bit of a mystery to me, very honestly speaking. It seems very obvious that if there is a shortage, there should be SECI auctions happening left, right and center. But the problem is that DISCOMs are also very cost-focused, right? So they look at the last auction that happened when commodity prices were low, when module prices were low, when GST was 5% instead of 12%, and they want to compare everything to that price and say, oh, but your price is now 20 paise higher or 30 paise higher, and they're not able to understand why. Although we all know that inflation, commodity prices and all have gone up. So the reality is that energy prices are going up. We all have to accept it. We all have to recognize that. And therefore, we have to make sure that we're able to buy. And the DISCOMs are comfortable to buy at the higher levels.
Well, speaking of DISCOMs and speaking of being able to buy, as well as the current outstanding receivables, I mean, that story, again, is a story that we've spoken about for years now. And it doesn't seem like the needle's moving on that one either.
No, I would say, Shereen, on that, I'm a little bit more optimistic. I have seen some improvement. See, actually what happened is during COVID, the DISCOMs, the financial health of the DISCOMs actually became much worse because they couldn't go out and collect money from their customers because, they didn't want to put pressure. But now the economy is picking up and therefore DISCOM financials are also improving. And so the payment situation has become somewhat better. Keep also in mind that all future auctions are happening mostly through SECI. And SECI gets paid on time. So it's really now kind of a legacy issue. But of course, we want DISCOM financial health to improve because ultimately they need to continue to buy more power.
So it's not a current receivable issue?
It is it is an issue because obviously all the old projects that we've done will need to keep getting paid for the next 20 years. But all the new projects that we're now doing, those ultimately are have a PPA with SECI, and therefore there isn't a payment problem.
Okay, so in terms of, specifically as far as Renew Power is concerned now, and you've had a pretty good year, you've touched many important milestones. Given the current context, the current environment, what do you see as the next milestones that you're going to be able to clock?
We have set some pretty ambitious targets. So by 2025, we want to hit anywhere between 18 and 20 gigawatts of commissioned capacity. I think that is quite doable. We are fully funded for that, so that should not be a problem. We just have to win a few more auctions that probably will happen over the next 12 to 18 months, and then we should be able to achieve those numbers. But I think beyond that, what we're seeing is a very interesting set of new opportunities that are emerging beyond our core power sector, wind and solar business. those are around green hydrogen. And, you know, we formed this JV with L&T and IOC. I think that's an area that is going to grow very substantially. And there are a lot of other adjacencies that are also opening up, because as the sector becomes bigger, you'll need more people doing digital, providing other kinds of services. And I think we as an operating company have the capability of getting into some of those areas. So those are things that we are looking at very seriously. And, you know, green hydrogen, all said and done, is an international opportunity. It's like oil and gas. It's going to be a globally traded commodity. And so you have to go to whichever are the best producing areas, right? And so therefore, you know, that is potentially going to take us outside India as we look for more green hydrogen places to manufacture as well.
Okay, but let's talk about being able to manufacture in India, because it's not just you, and you know, you talked about the JV that you have with L&T, but you know, whether it's Reliance or other companies, they're all looking at this space. Now, a realistic timeline of when we could actually see this take off, as well as that $1 aspiration that's been put on the table, and the expectation that India could perhaps leapfrog the green hydrogen curve.
Yeah, look, I think there have been a lot of statements about the cost of green hydrogen in the future, and I do hope that those come true, because if they do, it will really open up the market very substantially. I think we'll get to $1, $1.50 for the cost of green hydrogen by 2030 or thereabouts, right? So I don't think that's difficult. I think, you know, renewable energy costs will keep coming down. The cost of electrolyzers will improve. There'll be manufacturing efficiencies and scale efficiency. So I think there's a fairly good chance that we'll get to those numbers. But the reality is, even if we don't, green hydrogen as an opportunity is going to be very, very large scale, right? If you just look at the Indian government's target of 5 million tons of green hydrogen by 2030, that will require an additional 125,000 megawatts of renewable energy capacity over and above the existing target for the power sector. So it's going to be a very sizable opportunity, because, you know, 70% of the cost of green hydrogen is renewable energy. So I think that's sort of the foundation of the whole thing. Now, you are right, a number of players, of course, are getting into the sector. I see globally a lot of the oil and gas companies are looking at, you know, getting into green hydrogen, because that's something that they understand. And it's sort of the use cases are partly in their energy area.
BP, for instance, yes.
Exactly, and you'll see power sector companies also getting into that. So I think that's really how that whole sector will evolve. And the other interesting thing that we're going to have to look at in India is the whole issue of manufacturing, because, you know, I think the Indian government has done a very good thing in making it clear that they don't want to be dependent on China for module imports. Just like I think Russia, I mean, Europe is now discovering that reliance on Russia for its energy imports is not a smart thing. I think India, therefore, is taking a pretty positive step in trying to domesticate that whole industry. And I think that's going to be a big opportunity for Indian companies, which now can potentially set up manufacturing capacity on the back of domestic demand, but also then potentially look at exports.
And, you know, you talked about the manufacturing aspect and manufacturing efficiencies. Beyond the PLI scheme, you know, what else do you believe will need to be done to ensure that we can actually leverage on this opportunity?
You know, I think not that much, Shereen. You know, obviously, when we look at different states and look in, you know, and try to see what kind of, where we should set up that capacity, of course, different states will hopefully step forward and give different levels of incentives, and we'll see which are the better states to look at for setting up this capacity. But I think over and above that, there's nothing else that we require. I think the most important thing is protection from imports in the future. That's very critical, of course, and not just for 1 or 2 years, but it'll take us even 3 years to set up a polysilicon plant, for example. So we'll need protection beyond that. And of course, to the extent that the PLI scheme can be put together, we need to have that clarity. I don't think we need anything else beyond that. I think the domestic market is there, and that's going to be good enough.
You know, you talked about protection in the context of manufacturing. We've seen the government bring in certain measures over the last few days on a whole bunch of sectors, from steel to, of course, wheat, sugar, and so on and so forth. But, you know, one understands the sort of compulsion in the short term, but what does it mean in the long term? Because people are putting down big investments. For instance, steel has been driving the investment cycle, the capex cycle, over the last few years for India. So when you put in an export control, does it sour sentiment? Does it whet risk appetite? I mean, you know, how do you look at it?
You know, I'm not from those industries, so I can't really comment on how those manufacturers might be feeling. But my sense is that, look, a lot of commodity producers have made some really hefty profits in the last few years because of where the commodity cycle has gone to. And the Indian government has to make sure that we protect the domestic market, because these are very important input items into other industries, right? So if we want the whole economy to be competitive, keep inflation somewhat in check, then there will have to be some pain somewhere. Now, that pain can't be there for the common man, obviously, because they don't have the capacity to take it up. So if there are a set of companies that have made a lot of profits in the last few years, and that's where the government decides to go, then I can understand the rationale that the government is coming with.
So what's the big takeaway for you from Davos 2022, Sumant? What do you, leave? Do you feel confident, tentative, optimistic? How do you leave Davos?
You know, that's a great question. First of all, I feel that a summer Davos is infinitely better than a winter Davos.
The World Economic Forum doesn't seem to think so. I
know, unfortunately not. But otherwise, we would have been sitting here in our jackets and scarves and mufflers and freezing nevertheless. So I think from that standpoint, well, anyway, that's from the lighter side. Look, I think that the world is at a bit of a confused place right now. And I think everybody is trying to figure out what is the way forward from here. There are, I think, multiple issues that are going on. We were already at a very bad place before even the Russian war started, and that has just complicated matters infinitely. And with COVID in China, and you know, there's still this lingering fear about the rest of the world. All of that is not really creating a good environment. On top of that, the capital markets are sort of just going down. Bond markets, the yields are going up. So I think that's going to start causing its own pain as well. So if you ask me honestly, I think we're at a point in time, like we've had a few times in the past, where the world sort of goes into a very difficult period of time for like a year to 2 years. We're at the beginning sort of point of that. I think for the next 9 months to 12 months, things are going to stay pretty tight. I think the idea should be to husband your resources and be a little bit careful, and just wait and see how things evolve before taking any very significant decisions. That's for most people. In our sector, there's a tremendous sense of optimism, okay? There's a lot of growth, and it's really a question of how much can you do, how rapidly, because these opportunities are like once-in-a-lifetime opportunities. And so we really have to go as fast as possible.
Well, Sumant, we wish you the very best of luck. Thanks very much for joining us here on CNBC-TV18. We look forward to hearing more about your plans to be able to capitalize on this opportunity. We will take a break here on Davos 2022. There's a lot more coming up. Don't go anywhere. We're back in a moment with more conversation.